Is that the cry of your heart today? Lord, have your way in me. Yeah, we have to realize that when we say those words, we make a dangerous declaration. We say that whatever I want, whatever I'm demanding of the people around me, whatever it is that I can think of or come up with, Lord, if it's not yours, just go ahead and wreck it. Just go ahead and ruin it. Man, what a dangerous prayer. One we should all pray. But dangerous. Because you might not get your way. Oh, you might not get your way. I know that we've grown accustomed, all of us, getting our way. Oh, I'm the only one. No? Okay. A few brave souls over here willing to say yes. Everybody over here largely silent on the subject. They're not so sure they want their way. They're afraid I might have tried to trick them into something. I wouldn't do that, would I? Yes, I would. I would definitely try to trick you into admitting something just to use it for an illustration. So today I want to point you, as we continue in our series on the shadow of the cross, point you to Matthew chapter 27. I literally have so much I want to share with you on this topic today that I'm not going to have a whole lot of wiggle room here. So fasten your seatbelt, try to listen fast, because it's going to go quick. But I don't think that we can get there if you don't know the backdrop of the message. And that's where we start here at verse 11. Now Jesus was standing before Pilate, the Roman governor. "Are you the king of the Jews?" the governor asked. Jesus replied, "You have said it." We stop there. I can't even get further than that before I'm already stopping. Jesus answers the question. That's what you said. "Are you the king of the Jews?" That's what you said. I love this answer, because I believe that this shows Jesus' character, that he was a straight shooter, that he didn't leave any area for minced words. That's what you said. That's a conversation ender. When people ask you questions and they're talking about you in their question, this is the only appropriate response. That's what you said. But when the leading priests and the elders made their accusations against him, Jesus remained silent. "Don't you hear all these charges they are bringing against you?" Pilate demanded. But Jesus made no response to any of the charges, much to the governor's surprise. Now it was the governor's custom each year during the Passover celebration to release one prisoner to the crowd, anyone that they wanted. This year, there was a notorious prisoner, a man named Barabbas. As the crowds gathered before Pilate's house that morning, he asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" See the trick there? He's clearly looking for a way out, right? Do you want the killer or the Messiah? The Savior or the Destroyer? Life or death? He knew very well that the religious leaders had arrested Jesus out of envy. Just then, as Pilate was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent him this message: "Leave that innocent man alone. I suffered through a terrible nightmare about him last night." Guys, if your wife comes to you with this kind of message, pay attention. Pay close attention to the next few words that she might say. First of all, why were you dreaming about this man all night long? Second, why? What's going on? Tell me more. Meanwhile, the leading priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas to be released and for Jesus to be put to death. So the governor asked again, "Which of these two do you want me to release to you?" The crowd shouted back, "Barabbas." Pilate responded, "Then what should I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" They shouted back, "Crucify him." "Why?" Pilate demanded. "What crime has he committed?" But the mob roared even louder, "Crucify him!" Pilate saw that he was not getting anywhere and that a riot was developing. So he sent for a bowl of water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. The responsibility is yours." And all the people yelled back, "We will take responsibility for his death, we and our children." So Pilate released Barabbas to them, and he ordered Jesus flogged with lead-tipped whip, then turned over to the Roman soldiers to be crucified. So much to unpack there. So much to look at. First thing we see here is something that I believe we can all see if we look in the mirror. Everybody wants to succeed. Pilate is looking for a way to be successful in this situation. He's put in a virtually impossible scenario where he has the opportunity to choose to punish or release an innocent man. His success as the governor will be, well, today we're even still looking at his success as a governor based on this one decision. Nowhere in the Bible does it talk about the history of Pilate with the Roman government and with the Jews. But history books tell us that Pilate was a very, let's see, what's a good term that we can use for today? He was a flip-flopper. If the Jewish people said, "We want this," he said, "Sounds good to me. Don't want you to riot, don't want you to be mad, so sure, we can make that happen." If Caesar said, "That's enough, tell these Jews no." See, he became the guy that said no to everybody. "Nope, can't do that. Nope, can't do that. Nope, can't do that. But we're hungry, we want to eat." No, Caesar said no. He was a flip-flopper. He was a people pleaser. He just wanted to be successful. Notice the question that he asked, trying to ride the fence there. He says, "What should I do with Jesus?" This is a tough question. What should I do with Jesus? You said you want me to release the prisoner, and so you're saying you want me to keep Jesus. Where would you like me to keep him? You want him in jail? Where would you like this man? And the crowd screams, "Crucify him." More on that later. What I've come to realize is that everybody wants to be successful. How we get there is a big question. How do we get to what we define as success? The definition is unique for everybody. The method of getting there is unique for everybody. The end result is the same for everybody. We want to be successful. I've yet to meet someone who was starting a business who said, "My hope for my business is that we will be bankrupt in 2 years." I've yet to meet anyone going into grad school that said, "My big hope is that 2 years from now I flunk out." I've yet to meet a mechanic that said, "I hope every car that I work on falls apart down the road." Now, a successful business person who's shady might say, "I hope that car falls apart. They'll come right back to have it fixed." Now, Pastor Rebecca and I, we had a van at one point that we were sure every time we dropped it off to the dealership, they would break something that we didn't bring it in for so that we would bring it back sooner. I'm not saying they did that, but I can tell you the name of the dealership if you ask me privately. The reality is I don't know anyone that seeks failure. Most of us have a problem with failure. We are embarrassed by it. We feel like that when we fail, it says something about our efforts. It says something about our abilities. It says something about our competency. Our concern over failure tends to drive what we do next. And at some point in everybody's life, you get to a point where you work this scale of success and failure, and you begin to wobble on it. If I do this, there's a chance I might fail, so I will do this instead. And we start to hedge our bets a little bit, and we say, well, I can play with it, and I can get it just right. Maybe I won't fail as bad, or I won't fail as publicly, or I can hide this from everybody. This is a dangerous place for us to be, but if we don't venture anything, we, quite frankly, will never succeed. Because, well, I've told you before, there's only two options. It's move forward or die. You have to make progress or die. These are the options. And since I'm not choosing death, I feel like I have to move forward. I have to make progress. Even a small step forward is progress. Ask the turtle. The turtle moves very slow. But if you watch a turtle move through the sand, you see the streaks. And if you ask the snail riding on the back, he's screaming, "Why are we going so fast?" Success is measured differently based on your perspective. We're programmed to want to succeed. It's natural for all of us. We live in a world that makes success increasingly more difficult. I don't know if any of you have been watching the stock market this week. I imagine some of you have. Financial success seems a little bit more difficult to be had right now. A little bit more difficult. But there's opportunities for slow and steady success outside of that. We all have obstacles in our path. We all encounter opposition. One of my favorite conversations to have with people is when they start out with, "Well, you just don't understand my life." I say it's my favorite because I'm being sarcastic. It is my least favorite way to start a conversation. I feel like there's just a few conversation starters that are worse than that I won't share with you because I'm afraid you might use them to start conversations with me. We all encounter opposition. Opposition is not equal for all of us. Quite frankly, the better your idea, the better you're following what God would have you do, the more opposition you will face. So, if you don't face opposition, it's because you're not doing anything of any worth. When you get your toes back in, huh? I felt it a little bit. If you face no opposition, it's because you're no threat to anybody. No one feels the need to challenge you. Because people fight us all the time. Well, maybe it's just me. Maybe people just fight me all the time. But I have found that the harder I'm willing to work for something, the more I'm willing to follow what God would have me do, the more I'm willing to have the conversations and say the things that people don't necessarily want to hear, the more opposition I find. And sometimes the quest for success runs counter to our culture. I've mentioned it before, but maybe not all of you have heard it. When I worked in the mortgage industry, I was quite successful at closing loans. And one of my supervisors asked me one day, could you just walk me through what a typical process for you looks like? Because you're doing much better than people that have been here a long time, and you just started at this. And I said, well, the first thing I do is I just tell everybody I talk to the truth. And again, I won't tell you where I worked, but she asked me, she says, "How does that work?" She was confused how I could tell the truth to everybody and be successful. Because the job calls for telling partial truths, half-truths, lies, none of the truth. Yeah. The reality in that circle of people was that they couldn't believe that telling the truth to people was a way to be successful. My method of just disclosing everything to people and educating them on how mortgages actually work was successful because people felt like they could trust me. But they couldn't understand that in the mortgage industry. And they asked me to go teach another branch how to do it. When I went and taught the other branch how to do it, the whole branch started to close more loans and be more successful. And the vice president of the company says, "What are you doing here? What's different? How is this failing about the closed branch all of a sudden closing all these loans?" And I said, "Well, I just told everybody, tell your customers the truth. Tell them the real truth. Tell them what they're asking for is a bad idea. Tell them there's a company that has a better deal for them." He's like, "What?" I said, "It works. I don't know what to tell you. It works. We just tell people the truth." There's moments in our life that tend to shape us. And the decisions that we make in those moments seem to shape the very essence of who we are. I didn't set out to change a company's viewpoint of how they talk to customers, but that's what happened. That company began to tell the truth to everybody. Not every person that worked there, but a lot of people began to tell the truth. And shaping that essence of who we are changes who we're going to be. Changes how we define success. And it changes how people around us view us. As the cross cast its shadow on all of the people who would embrace the cross, we feel that squeeze. Where we have to embrace it. We have to go beyond just hearing the words and living them, embracing them, and accepting them. I heard a person this week ask, "Why do we celebrate the cross?" His opinion, and just give me a moment here, his opinion was, I think if we asked Jesus if we should celebrate the cross, he might say no. The cross wasn't very fun for Jesus. The cross wasn't something to be celebrated. The empty tomb, yes. The method of getting into that tomb, maybe not. Just a different thought thing for you to kind of wrap your head around, that maybe we put too much emphasis on the cross, and instead we should look at a method that Jesus got to the grave. Whatever that method might have been. Because, the Pilate could have chose any method of killing Jesus. He could have had him just beat to death. I mean, they almost did. But they chose the cross. So we look at the cross and we say, well, that's where Jesus died. But it could have been anywhere. I think if it was a modern day story, we might be talking about Jesus who got hit by a car. Or, pick your illustration there. Of all of the people that were connected to the crucifixion of Jesus, none of them should have been as surprised as Pilate. Pilate is looking at this, he didn't want to do it. Most of the world around him was calling for something that he felt was wrong, and yet he did it anyway. In today's words, we would call that political expediency. If you're not familiar with that term, that's pretty much just saying whatever needs to be said to get people to either move away from you or agree with you. Whatever it takes to get you off of my back. I think we see that sometimes in wait, I'll stop right there and leave that politic conversation for you to just have on your own. This premise of just getting people to think however you think by saying whatever you think they want to hear is the most dangerous thing in our society right now, in my opinion. I believe that the problem with living in a world that functions and progresses based on political expediency is, I want the right word here, the word that won't hurt you. But I believe that if we give in to this, then we lose the truth. Because what we get is a comfortable, feel-good kind of message that just helps us feel better. You know, I could take moments and tell you how great Jermaine is, and I'd be telling the truth. But if I went too far with it, all of you would think, what is the deal here? Right? You guys are afraid to agree with me today. We could all recognize him, and if given the chance, we could go around the room and everybody could find something nice to say to or about Jermaine. Agreed? Yeah. There we go. That was better. They agree with you, not with me. So, the danger in that is, if we just tell somebody all the good things about them and never, ever, ever address what is needing of change and what could be different, then we do a disservice to her. Because there's no growth there. Why would you? If everybody thinks that I'm great and perfect, why would I change? I know you guys feel that way. And so I let you. Every once in a while I have to remind you I'm not perfect, just so you can remember. Move your favorite chair around or something so that you can remember I'm not perfect. But if we give in to operating in this climate of political expediency, we really do take the chance of losing the truth. I can't imagine trying to explain the Bible to a non-believer and seeing how politically correct I could be. I just can't imagine it. I believe that the Bible gives us pretty clear definitions of right and wrong, and that if we share those in a method of, I care about you, I want to see you thrive, I would like to see you succeed, then the truth can be accepted as it is, just the truth. And we can throw all this political correctness in the garbage where it belongs. If we're going to be focused on anything today, I think that we should focus in on the question that Pilate asked the rioting crowd. What should I do with this Jesus? How can I make you happy and do the right thing at the same time? That's what he's asking. If we just take one side of that conversation and say, how can I make you happy? And we lose the what should we do with Jesus part, the conversation was pointless and worthless. Quite frankly, a waste of time. When Jesus pulls Barabbas up and compares Jesus and Barabbas, what is it that you think he's actually doing there? He's looking for a way out. He's trying to escape without getting dirty. He wants to be able to tell the Jews, we kept Barabbas because that's what you asked for. And he wants to tell the Roman Empire, we released Jesus because that's what they asked for. That way, if they riot, if they're angry, if they decide to kill Jesus when he's released, he's good. This is political expediency. If I can find a way to take all the things that you want and put them there, and I can step away and say, it's not my fault, you did what you did, then we lose the truth. Because regardless of whatever Pilate did here, we were going to be talking about him for eons. If he had released Jesus, let's flip the story just a little bit. If Pilate had decided, I'm going to release Jesus aside from what the religious leaders have asked for, aside from what the Jewish people have asked for, I'm going to release Jesus because he's innocent. And they had killed him on the street in a riot, Caesar would have sent Roman soldiers to shut down the Jewish population. He would have killed every Jew. That's my opinion, but I think that we could back that up with the way that they fought and took over different ways. Probably would have just annihilated all of the Jews. And how would we talk about Pilate today? We would say, there's a guy that didn't protect Jesus. Instead, we talk about him in ways of how we can make better decisions, ways that we can point people to the truth. But instead, we have here, as the shadow falls, we look at Pilate in the heart of this story as the good guy, as the bad guy, both. I think that there's an argument to be made here that Pilate is a complex individual. And before you're too hard on him, maybe you should also take that moment to kind of hold that mirror in front of yourself and say, Pilate's complex, just like all of us. That while he wanted to find a solution that would make people happy and do the right thing, when we read it in the biblical narrative, we're looking for that answer to the question: who's good, who's bad in this story? And we have a tendency to do this with, everything. We look around even this room and we say, well, that person's not as friendly as that person, or don't shake their hand because they'll squeeze your hand too hard, or trying to break your hand. We're always evaluating things. And I think that's what Pilate was doing here. He was evaluating the situation, and he was trying to place this situation into a category of whether the people would support him and whether he would get in trouble with his bosses. And then he realizes that the problem is much more complex than even he thought it was. But this is Pilate. This is the life of someone working in the middle. This is the life of someone who wants to be politically expedient. This is the life of measuring your words so carefully that you can't say anything. And Pilate, if you look through history, you'll find that he did not have a great reputation for being a kind person. Instead, he had quite the opposite reputation, where if there was an uprising of the people, he would just kill the people. It's pretty easy to fix those problems. These people are complaining and arguing, we'll just kill them. These are easy decisions to make as a leader. And the boss is never mad about that, because what does the boss always want? Peace. Peace is acquired by killing the people that disrupt the peace. Wouldn't that be a nice way to run the church? Oh. Too far? No, not at all. Okay. Maybe a different discussion for the board meeting now. But when we take the image of the Gospels and we paint Pilate as not an evil person, we're dismissing the truth about him. In this particular incident, he's looking to acknowledge that Jesus is innocent. He's examined him. He's seen what's going on. He's had his wife interrupt him to tell him, don't do this thing. He knows that Jesus is innocent. But then he begins to see the religious leaders who are calling for the death of Jesus. And he called out to the crowd and asked, what should he do? And they say, crucify him. And caught with a situation where he has no good choice, he decides to allow harm to an innocent man. And it's not that he didn't care. Ironically, he did care. He sent for Barabbas, essentially asking, hey, could you find anybody that is the polar opposite of this very innocent man? I believe that Pilate struggled with this decision, that it was difficult for him, that he knew Jesus was innocent. As he struggled with his decision, he decides, here's a good idea. I will send him to Herod, and I'll let Herod take care of it. Well, Herod was a great man, and so he sent him back. He said, I'm not dealing with that. You take him. And Jesus became a hot potato there for a little while. I don't want him. You take him. And then he says, I'll put Barabbas alongside of him. But then the religious leaders, their threats strike a chord. He realizes that if he allows the community to riot, he will lose his job. And just quite very frankly, just probably would lose his life, not just his job. They didn't really reassign governors. You were either successful or dead. Another good choice, right? You be successful or die. He interviews Jesus, trying to do the right thing, and finds that he's innocent. I think this is where we all might struggle in this story. It's because we know that he's innocent, and we know that if he releases him, he's probably going to die anyway. No matter what Pilate did, this was going to turn out bad. But Pilate interviews Jesus, and as people who, judges and attorneys, they're kind of accustomed to guilty people or anybody accused of a crime. Let's just go there. Their first response is, I didn't do it. I'm innocent. It wasn't my fault. I couldn't help it. I was trapped. This was the only way I could get out of what I was doing. It's nobody's fault, right? Jails are full of innocent people. Oh, no, you knew that? Everybody's innocent in jail. Just ask them. Just ask them. Everybody's innocent. It was their lawyer's fault. It was the judge's fault. It was society's fault. It was because they didn't have this, or because they had this, or whatever reason you can think of. But Jesus, when he's accused, what does he say? Nothing. Silence. One translation of this text says that Pilate was amazed, that he was in awe, that Jesus would say nothing. And this is the point where I believe Pilate is wavering. He's teetering on the edge. He knows that it's an innocent man, and he's battling, how do I get out of this? How do I distance myself from this? How do I change what's about to happen? He's ready to release Jesus. His mind is racing for a method of releasing Jesus without him becoming the scapegoat. When he finds out that Jesus is from Galilee, he releases him to Herod. When he comes back from Herod, he sends for Barabbas. When he puts Barabbas and Jesus in front of the people, he is reaching for a way out of this. See, I think that many times we miss the opportunity to reach for a way to get out of our bad situations. We throw up our hands and say, well, this is going to happen, so guess that's the way it is. See, eventually, Pilate comes out and he just says it. He says, I can't find any wrong with this man. But the crowd backs up and begins to get more violent, more loud. And he comes up with this plan and he gives them an option. I wonder if Pilate really believes that the people are going to buy it at this point. I wonder, because I think that when they typically released a prisoner, it was, people that were convicted of tax fraud or white collar crimes, things that they could say, oh well, yeah, he's done his time. Let's get him out of here. When he puts a murderer up against an innocent man, and he announces it as, here is the murderer and here is the Messiah, and the people still say, give us Barabbas. Now he's stuck. You've been there? You've been stuck, out of options, nothing to do but move forward. Have to go through it. It's the only way you're going to get on the other side of it. Opposition to the left, opposition to the right, and you've got no choice but to go down the middle. Pilate introduces Barabbas as the worst. The people were glad that Barabbas was locked up. They were scared of him. He was a person not to be crossed. And because the religious leaders walked through the crowd and said, ask for Barabbas. Crucify Jesus. They were terrified. The leaders were terrified that Jesus was going to take over their jobs. Now, we can look backwards on the story and say, what a dumb thing to think. Right? What a dumb thing to think. If they had fallen in line and followed Jesus, they would have found that the job was easier with Jesus than it was without him. They would have found that Jesus was the reason they had a job in the first place. They would have found life and more of it. But instead they called for Barabbas. They called for Jesus to be killed. When Pilate plays his ace in the hole, he's got Barabbas and he says, this is a murderer. And they ask for Jesus. I think that Pilate at that point knew there's nothing I can say here. I'm done. Either way. I think when he introduced Barabbas, he thought, I'm a genius. There's no way this can't work. And then after they said, "Give us Jesus," I'm sure he thought, "I'm an idiot." There was no good way for this to turn out. So as they chant, "Crucify him, crucify him," the passage says that Pilate pacified the crowd. And he released Barabbas. You know, it's been my experience that if you ask God to leave you alone, He will. He'll leave you completely alone. And if you decide you want to do it just a little bit, I'm going to keep these things that I've been doing because they're not hurting anybody, but I'll do the rest of this Bible stuff. He'll leave you alone, and He'll let you. But eventually, there's a price to be paid. And each one of us will pay that price on our own. We will either get the opportunity to stand before our Creator and say, "Nope, Jesus' blood. That's my excuse. Jesus' blood, He covered everything, remember? Remember, I asked Him to, and He did." Or, oops. And that's where the crowd falls in this story. They fall in the oops section. There's no coming back from oops. Oops is final. It's a nice, soft way to say eternity separated from God. One decision. One uncovered thing. And this crowd chose it. They said, "Give us Barabbas. Crucify Jesus." I can gain some respect for the way that the religious leaders went after it. They told Pilate, "You're no friend of Caesar if you release Jesus." Basically telling him, "We're going to tell Daddy. If you break the rules, we're going to tell Daddy. And he's going to be mean to you." So Pilate turns over Jesus under threat of death. His own death. Because the threat from the religious leader had teeth. They could do what they said they might do, and if they did, Pilate knew how that would end. So he makes this decision. Much like we have to make a decision. He knows that if he backs down, that there's two choices. Do what's right and face the consequences, or do what's wrong and reap the rewards. We know how he chose. And I don't want you to be hard on Pilate. I don't want you to hear this story and think, well, he was just a bad guy and that's just the way it goes. He did the dishonest thing. But later on, he knows how wrong he is. And he has to face that consequence. He knows that condemning an innocent man leaves him in a bad place. Just like we know that when we go against what God would have us do, that we're wrong. My fear is that oftentimes we look the other way and pretend like God didn't say that. We move away from the text and interpret it in a way that says, oh, I can do this, because the Bible doesn't say I can't. When Pilate takes the bowl and he washes his hands and he says, the blood of this man is on you. It's a symbolic gesture. It doesn't mean anything. There was no opportunity to wash the guilt that Pilate had off of him. When he says this, he says, I'm not responsible for this innocent man's death. But he could have stopped it. He certainly had the opportunity to stop it. But out of fear for his own life, he couldn't make that decision. Sometimes we get caught in our web of desire for success or our actual success, and we lose our focus of doing what's right. And it happens real fast, and it will sneak up on you. And you, if you've ever asked the question, how did we get here? You understand that the desire for success can lead you to places you don't want to go. Most recently, I was talking to someone about a video that they were watching on YouTube, and I said, "Oh, why did you search that?" Because it was very obscure. And they said, "Well, I was watching a video on this that somebody sent me, and then it said you might like this, and then it said you might like this, and then it said you might like this, and the next thing I knew, I was watching this video about how crazy things are." And that is how our life can change. Just one simple, well, that's not bad. I can go over here. Well, that person's fun. Well, this thing is fun. How did I get here? How did I get so far from Jesus? Truth for us is that Jesus came to reconcile his creation. Pilate ends up right in the middle of this story. He didn't want to be there. He didn't want to make the decision that had to be made. But right in the middle, we find Pilate as where he could have been a pawn for God. He ended up being a pawn for evil. Here's a short step. And we all have that fork in the road moment where we have to make a decision of, am I going to be this or this? God gives Pilate's wife a dream, giving Pilate an opportunity to get out of all of this. And he ignores it for political correctness. He ignores it to make the most people happy. I believe that God offers opportunities like that for all of us every day. Where we have the opportunity to see what is good and what is evil and make our own decision. To choose which way we will go. And it's in those moments when we feel stressed, pressed, angry, hungry, you pick your emotion, that we can be tempted to do something we wouldn't normally do. And feel justified. God's calling us to make the right decision all the time. He gives us an opportunity to make the right decision all the time. One of my favorite misquotes of the Bible is people like to say, well, God will never give you more than you can handle. No, He purposely gives you more than you can handle, so you call on Him. And if you will call on Him, that door to opportunity for escape will open every time. When you feel trapped, when you feel angry, when you feel hungry, whatever it is, whatever that emotion is that's calling you to think you're justified to do this other thing, that's when we call on Jesus. That's when the redemptive power of the death and resurrection of Christ is available to each and every one of us. When we call on it. Only when we call on it. What a gentleman our God is. That instead of saying, I'll just take care of everything and you can have a nice cupcake life, He says, when you call on me, I'll be there. I'll be there for you in the decision-making process. I'll be there when there's a delay. I'll be there when the traffic backs up. I'll be there when you ask me. I think it's humorous that we believe we call on God and then He comes racing to us, ignoring that He's right there all along and that we just turned our head, that we looked away, that we couldn't find Him because, well, we were focused on our success. We were so focused on what we wanted. We were so focused on what we were listening to that we could not hear that still small voice. And we trapped ourselves. And we didn't hear that small voice say, "Are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure you want to say that? Are you sure you want to send that email? Are you sure you want to do this that way?" And once we miss that and do our own thing, it's out there. Now, I know all of you are super saintly, and you may not recognize what I'm about to explain to you. But every once in a while, I will say something I wish I hadn't. And once it's out there, it tends to get repeated back to me. And once it's out there on email, it gets sent back to me. And usually it goes to 5 or 6 other people before it comes back to me. Now, I know none of you have experienced this, so you have no idea what I'm talking about. But let me caution you on saying only what needs to be said, only when it needs to be said, and only to who it should be said. See, if we're in tune with what God would have us do, we can hear that small voice that says, "Are you sure you want to send that email? Are you sure you want to say those words?" And sometimes we get to hear Him say, "Don't say anything." Now, that's how I'll say it to you. To me, He says, "Shut up, shut up, shut up." Because, I'm hard-headed. I know you didn't know. I'm sorry. I have to apologize when people find out I'm not perfect. Life comes at us quick. And if we look at things from God's perspective of our life, we see that He's working things out in advance of us getting to these situations. That the path has already been set down. And all we have to do is walk it. And some people that I talk to, they say, "Oh, what a controlling God you serve." And I say, "No, what a glorious God that paves a way for me to walk." We have a choice. There's a nice paved road. It's still got some jump to the left and to the right, and some things you can get into that you don't necessarily want to. But the other way is a rocky path that's all uphill, full of stuff that you don't want to be around. And each of us gets to make that choice. Today, what I would have you pull out of the shadow of the cross is decisions. That you get to make one, and another, and another, and another. Run your life however you see fit. But if you would be so bold as to ask Jesus for how He would have you do whatever that is, you'll find decisions aren't hard. They become very clear. They become paved and rocky. Paved and rocky. And you can make easy decisions and go, nope, this way is definitely the way. But if you go it alone, the temptation of the thrill of the rocky side tends to take over. And you find yourself far, far away from where you want to be. So I can encourage you this week, that as you think about the shadow of the cross, as we move towards Easter, 1 week closer, that you would think about all of the decisions you make this week and pause just long enough to ask God what He would have you do. That you would submit to His authority and His knowledge and His way. Father, we thank you for this day. Lord, we count it as such a privilege to be able to be in your presence. Lord, we ask that as we go from this place that you would take every thought, every word, every action that we encounter or that we give to others this week, that it would be inspired, ordained, and executed in the way that you would have it done. Lord, as we surrender to your will, we ask that you would do exactly what you've already said you would do. That you would be there for us. That you would show us your way. Lord, grant us the courage to say yes and the audacity to know that you have the right plan, the right path, and the right way. Lord, we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.